Now, before you open your Bibles, and I assure you that I will want you to open them very soon, let's have another look at the story so far and the way that it was intended to be heard. So the land of the Philistines was along the coast, and it was southwest of Israel, I think from your just little strip down here. Aphek was a few miles from the coast, but it was a long way north into the territory of Israel. This is looking like a major land grab by the Philistines, and defeat for Israel is not an option. Well, that's something we're used to now, aren't we, in Ukraine? Incursions into someone else's land. This is a battle they can't afford to lose. But the first battle starts, and they're roundly defeated. And the elders at this point do a good thing. They ask, why did the Lord bring defeat? Why did the Lord bring defeat? They've recognized that defeat and victory is to do with what God has decided. It's the right question. They recognize that it is God who brings defeat or victory. The Israelites have lost 4,000 men. They've lost their credibility. They've lost their dignity. And they know this is God's doing. Now, we're not privy to the complete conversation that went and the debate that went on between them at this point, but I think it's a fair bet from what we can read that it went something like this. Well, God was not with us in the battle. So how can we ensure that he is with us when we try again? Now let's think about those great successes of the past. The ark went up to the Jordan, didn't it? And the Jordan parted before us. The ark went with us when we went round and round Jericho. And God won that battle for us too. That's what's missing. There's something missing, and that's my title. There's something missing. There's something missing. It's the ark. God isn't just going to let anything happen to this precious symbol of his presence. In fact, the ark is where he dwells on earth, and that's even emphasized by the writer, that God dwells between the cherubim on the ark. God must give us success if we take the ark with us. So the ark arrives with a number of priests, including the two sons of Israel's leader, and the turnaround in the feeling of the camp is overwhelming. And the noise that goes out from the camp, dancing and stamping and shouting, such hope and anticipation has entered the camp. It's like a small earthquake. The earth shook, the writer tells us. And that's the feeling in the camp. This is it, boys. Are we ready for tomorrow? You bet we are. Well now, the Philistines may have won the last battle, but the rumbling in the ground and the shouts in the air as the people of God celebrate strike fear into the hearts of the Philistines. Gods have come into the Israelite camp, and these gods have a frightening track record. These gods brought plagues against Egypt, and as one of the more modern translations puts it, they all say, we're doomed. Yeah, you've all remembered, Dad's Army. Yeah, I know. But that's the feeling in their camp. It seems that God's presence in the form of the ark has brought hope into the hearts of God's people and fear into the hearts of his enemies. So all is well in the Old Testament world. So let me read you what happens next. And this is the Philistines talking. Take courage, O men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight. So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated. And they fled, every man to his home. And there was a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. And the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. Okay, you can turn to 1 Samuel chapter 4 now. That's where I've been reading from. Please do. You see, I wonder if you weren't expecting that. This is how the writer of the passage wanted it to be heard. The passage is written as if it is leading up to a great victory. It's that classic film plot, isn't it? You know, how many films, in fact, probably almost every film, has this in it. It starts with a terrible body blow. It might be something emotional, it might be something physical, but it starts with failure, doesn't it? And then, after all the toing and froing, at the last minute, the hero of the hour delivers the knockout punch and rides off into the sunset. I have totally mixed up so many genres there, but don't worry about it. You get the idea. And that is the way that this skillful writer of the book of 1 Samuel has written it. He wants the listeners to think, I know what's happening next. They're going to win. Now they've got the ark. Now they've got the presence of God with them. You see, I've checked out 5 modern versions, and every single one of them has the same heading or something like it for this section. Have a look. It starts, "The Philistines capture the ark." It's like Agatha Christie entitling a novel, "The Butler Did It." You know? And that's the problem. Now, there's nothing wrong. I like these headings. I think they're helpful. They help you find your way quickly around the Bible, don't they? And you're looking, I know this passage is somewhere, and you can find it much more quickly. It's a good thing. But sometimes they're just a bit of an irritation. And you kind of miss the point of this passage if you start knowing that the end point is the ark is going to be captured. It's not the way it's been written by the writer. It's been written so that it comes as a surprise. And when you've read that title, "The Philistines Capture the Ark," it's really hard to suspend that thought for a moment, isn't it, as you read it? The writer wants us to know that something has gone terribly wrong. Remember that the book of 1 Samuel is actually a sermon. It's not actually written as history. It's written as a sermon for people living in the time, probably much later in the time of Kings, possibly at the time of the return after captivity. The writer is saying, look at what happened in the past. Don't go there again. And the Holy Spirit has written it down for us. Look at what happened in the past. Don't go there again. Because you're humans like they are. And you're going to have the same weaknesses and failures. And a story that's meant to end with the heroes riding off into the sunset has turned into tragedy for God's people and for the honor of God's name. The writer is challenging his readers to search their souls now while they're reading it to ensure that they are not heading in the same direction as their ancestors. Now, we know from a couple of chapters before, it's actually 1 Samuel 2:34, where he prophesied that Hophni and Phinehas would die on the same day as a sign that God was judging Eli's household. But the tragedy and judgment for Eli was not over yet. When Eli hears of the capture of the ark, he falls backwards off his chair and dies. And the writer does something interesting here. And again, this is where you get the idea. This is not just history. This is a sermon. This is a message from God to be listened to. And he makes us think. And if you read verse 18, chapter 4, verse 18, it says this. As soon as they had mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backwards from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died. For the man was old and heavy. He had judged Israel for 40 years. See, it wasn't his weight, actually, that led to his death, but his weight gets mentioned. And if you've read the first 3 chapters, you'll understand his weight is significant. It was the cause of his weight that led to his death. Eli gave in to his desire for the best food, and he indulged his sons in their sinful behavior. They didn't do what God had commanded, but they kept the best food for themselves, and they shooed anyone else away who wanted to get the best or saw them doing it. It was a measure of what was in their heart. And Eli was a heavy man because he'd eaten the food he shouldn't have had. And that's why he gets mentioned at this point. It was the cause of his weight that caused his death and the judgment on his family. And there's also Hophni's wife who dies in childbirth, but not before making a very profound statement. Now, in fact, the way this is written is profoundly wrong, but it's profound nevertheless. It's the last verse of chapter 4. And she said, this is Hophni's wife, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." The meaning here is because the ark has been captured. The glory has departed from Israel because the ark of God has been captured. And that statement probably reflects the majority view in Israel. The glory has departed for or because the ark has been captured. And if we take those two statements on their own, they are both true. The glory has departed and the ark has been captured. But actually they're in the wrong order. You probably spotted that already. The glory didn't depart when the ark departed. The glory had departed long ago. The glory went when the evil practices came in. The glory departed when the people started to think they knew best. Yes, you see, these people, they were religious enough. They went up to the temple and made sacrifices. But do you remember what we read at the beginning? David said, it's not the sacrifices you want. That's not what you're looking for. And it wasn't what he was looking for in the Israelites at this time. And as far as the Israelites were concerned, they might be as nice as anyone that you might meet in the Middle East, possibly nicer. But they were like so many people who call themselves Christians, full of clever ideas and good intentions. But where is the humble, obedient, total dependence on God's grace and mercy? The glory departed from Israel when Israel turned their hearts away from dependence on God. And as a result, the ark has been captured. Here's the correct statement for all who have ears to hear. The ark of God has been captured because the glory has departed from Israel. The glory didn't go when the ark went. The ark went because the glory had gone. And God was just telling them how bad things had got when he arranged it and allowed it for the ark to be taken away. So we have a devastating judgment on Israel and the house of Eli at the hands of a righteous God. We have a statement which reveals that Israel's hearts have moved from total dependence and trust, a living relationship with a living God, and they have substituted this precious relationship with religious activity. They've taken away, they've lost the relationship and replaced it with religious activity. How easily we do the same. True worship of the heart is exchanged for, well, if it's just going up to the temple and doing the actions without a heart, it's superstition. No more than that. But God has more to teach them and us before he starts to turn the world the right way up again. We see this in chapter 5, so let's have a look at chapter 5, first 5 verses. When the Philistines captured the ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon and set it up beside Dagon. And when the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, behold, Dagon had fallen face down on the ground before the ark of the Lord. So By the way, this is almost the definition of what a Philistine is. Okay, by the way, this is why we use the term Philistine nowadays, if you ever do still. Okay, so what do? So they took Dagon and put him back in his place. But when they rose early on the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen face down on the ground before the ark of God, and the head of Dagon and both his hands were lying cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. This is why the priests of Dagon and all who enter the house of Dagon do not tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. I mean, astonishingly, they didn't give up Dagon, despite the fact that he ends up prostrate before the God, the representation of God on earth. But here's the question. Did some brave Israelites sneak in to tip Dagon over in the night? No, they definitely did not. Did they sneak in and do the same thing the next night? Well, of course not. The Israelites are terrified. They're running frightened. No one did that. God does not need Israel to bring glory to himself. He can humiliate the gods of any nation and cause them to lie prostrate at his feet without any help from Israel. And let's see what else God does without any help from Israel. The hand of the Lord was heavy against the people of Ashdod, and he terrified and afflicted them with tumors, both in Ashdod and its territory. And when the men of Ashdod saw how things were, they said, "The ark of the Lord of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is hard against us and against Dagon our God." So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" They answered, "Let the ark of the God of Israel be brought round to Gath." So they brought the ark of God to Israel there. See, the Philistines have been stupid enough to re-erect Dagon, but they weren't so stupid that they couldn't see that things were going badly in the area immediately around the ark of God. God is making his glory known. Now, I'm not much of a Hebrew scholar, but I'm going to try and give you a little Hebrew lesson, okay? The word meaning glory in 4 verse 22 is kabod. It actually is a word that has the meaning of weight, weightiness, heavy. The heavy glory of God, or the weighty glory of God. God's glory is not fleeting. It's not here today. It's not the glory of a firework. Here today, here for a moment and gone. It's weighty glory. It's heavy glory. And the word heavy that the writer uses to describe the actions of God on the Philistines is kabed. So the glory of God is kabod. What happens to the Philistines is kabed. And they both have this meaning of weightiness, heaviness. The words are for the same root. The weight of God's transcendent glory and the heavy hand of God on his enemies are all part of the same thing. God's glory does not depend on Israel. And until they submit to the glory of God, God's heavy hand will be upon them too. Both the Philistines and Israel have a choice. Bow down, like Dagon, before the glory, the kabod of God, or continue to suffer the heavy kabed hand of God. God's glory is shown in his blessing. God's glory is shown in his judgment. So let's just continue in our reading. So this is verse 8. So they gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" They answered, "Let the ark of God of Israel be brought round to Gath." So they brought the ark of God to Israel there. But after they had brought it round, the hand of the Lord was against that city, causing very great panic. And he afflicted the men of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. But as soon as the ark of God came to Ekron, the people of Ekron cried out, "They've brought round to us the ark of the God of Israel to kill us and our people." They sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, "Send away the ark of the God of Israel, and let it return to its own place, that it may not kill us and our people." For there was deathly panic throughout the whole city. The hand of God was very heavy. That kabed word. It was very heavy there. So the men who did not die were struck with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. Well, this evening we'll look at what happened next. But for the time being, God's message is loud and clear to the Philistines who are suffering under the heavy hand of God, to the Israelites who are suffering under the Philistines, to the original readers of 1 Samuel that it was written for, and to us in the 21st century. God's message is this: bow down before my glory, or you will suffer my heavy hand upon you. And either way, I will be glorified. So what can we learn from this? The Israelites see things going badly, and they recognize that something is missing. God is not blessing them, and they need to do something about it. We might recognize that things are difficult, they're going badly for us. In our personal lives, in our church. And we can see that something is missing. We're not experiencing the blessing of God, and we want to do something about it. So far, so good. At this point, the Israelites look for a quick fix. Very often we do too. The problem is with quick fixes that they only deal with the symptom and not the underlying cause. I mean, you can dry your foot on a towel, but it won't help much if you don't repair your shoes. Quick fixes and easy fixes deal with symptoms and not causes. And in the case of the Israelites, their quick fix didn't even sort out the symptom. They carried on losing battles even worse than before. But let's say in your personal life, should we say for the sake of argument, you have an unreasonable boss, and you start behind his back, bad-mouthing him, and you take out your frustrations on your family, and you think, I need a new job. See, moving to a new job is the obvious quick fix. And it may temporarily calm the symptoms of your irritability. But that's actually only a quick fix. You haven't dealt with the underlying issue. Your behavior, both to your work colleagues, to your boss, and to your family, is sinful. That's what's got to be dealt with. Not the situation. It's the heart. And it's very easy for me to think that to get my faith back on track, I just need a different job, a husband or wife, better school for me or my children, somewhere more pleasant to live, better church maybe. You see, none of these things, it's not wrong to change these things. Sometimes it's right. But if we think that we will correct the underlying problem by changing our circumstances, then we've missed the point. Similarly, some people may look at our church and feel that things are not going well, especially as other churches seem to be moving from strength to strength. Temptation is to look for that something which is missing, that something that will turn the church around. Maybe we're inclined to do as the Israelites did. We reason that we would be better off if we did things as we did them in the past. Others will look at other churches and say we'd be so much better off if we did things like they do. I'm an elder. I've had that said to me so many times about different things. This would make us so much more effective. Look how successful they are. Oh, I'm not saying we shouldn't learn. We absolutely do. Let's look at what other people are doing. Let's look at what God's blessing. But don't pretend that if there's a problem in our hearts, that changing the way we do things, or some thing in the church, is going to deal with that. It's interesting to note that when the Israelites brought the ark into the camp, there was a great feeling of euphoria and anticipation there. Remember that the shout that went up from them was so great that it shook the earth, and their enemies were terrified. The Israelites must have felt such a sense of the presence of God. Now that they have the ark right there with them in the camp, what a buzz. But God was not there, because their hearts had walked away from him. A great buzz of excitement and anticipation is not evidence that God is at work. Before we move on, I just want to define something for us in biblical terms. And that is, what do we mean by the word defeat? What's defeat for a Christian? Because we don't want to end up with a little twist in our thinking like Hoffner's wife had, where we get things back to front. So here's a helpful definition. Defeat is not achieving what God has commanded us to do. Defeat is not achieving what God has commanded us to do. God told Israelites to enter the land, possess it, and drive out the occupants. Losing battles to the invading Philistines is clearly defeat, because God had said you're to own that land. But there's another defeat, which is underlying the cause of the lost battles. God has commanded that they should recognize his holiness, power, and love. And that they should be humble before him, loving him with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. Using our good definition of defeat, we can see that the Israelites were living with defeat day by day. Put the battles to one side. There is defeat in the camp of the Israelites before they start. The defeat was there a long time before they lost the battles. And what Israel did when they encountered defeat was no more than moving some religious furniture around. Oh yes, the ark was special. The ark was important because God had put it in place. But it had become no more to the Israelites than a piece of religious furniture. Defeat is not achieving what God has commanded us to do. See, if we use this definition, living in poverty is not defeat. Suffering with a debilitating illness is not defeat. Being single is not defeat. Being persecuted is not a defeat. Being tempted is not defeat. Some people feel that these things are a defeat. And some people claiming to preach the Bible will tell you that these things are a defeat or they're defeats. But they're wrong. Nowhere does God say that we can or must be free from poverty or illness in this life. Singleness is portrayed as an opportunity rather than a defeat. If you have true faith, you will be persecuted. If you're not being persecuted, probably nobody knows you're a Christian. Jesus was tempted, and he was never defeated. But if you doubt the love or power of God, you're heading towards defeat. And if you are dissatisfied with what God has given you, you are living with defeat. And if you give in to the fear of man or another temptation, this too is defeat. Similarly, we can look at what God has commanded for the church. We can look at Ephesians or other New Testament letters. We should be living in unity with God's people. Our fellowship should be characterized by love, shown in patience, humility, and gentleness. And we should be holding out the word of truth to those around us. Failure to do any of these things, and I'm sure you are doing all those things, but failure to do them is against what God has commanded for us. So it's defeat. As I said earlier, when we see a problem in the church, our inclination is to look for a quick fix. something or things that we should do to make church better. But generally, these things that concern us so much, and I'm speaking from experience here, are not things commanded by God. Oh, goodness, I'm to look back at the Cold Harbour. I mean, God never commanded a certain hymn book should be used. That's one of those things, isn't it? People get quite het up about it. But God never commanded that. He commanded that we should sing. He commanded that we should sing the truth. Well, that's important. But quite often, the things that cause irritation and problems in church are not things commanded by God. Fixing such matters is no more than rearranging the religious furniture and does not solve the underlying problem. If we desire to fix some problem in the church, we must first examine our hearts to see if there's an underlying problem. So, if we are feeling defeated in our lives, in our church, whatever it is, what should we do? Well, we must first understand that God will bring glory to himself. He does not need our help. It's a really important thing to remember. He does not need our help. He didn't need Israel's help in getting Dagon to bow down in his presence. Didn't need it. He didn't need Israel's help for the Philistines to say, we've just got to get rid of this ark. It's got to go. He didn't need them. This is the lesson of chapter 5. God is sovereign. We must submit to his wonderful, loving authority. We must accept that he decides my circumstances and yours. And he does this for my good, to make me more Christ-like and to bring glory to himself. God wants to use me in the situation that he has assigned to me to bring glory to himself. This is what he wanted the Israelites to do. But he does not need them to bring glory to himself, and he does not need me. We also need to see the problems and defeat as God sees them. Problems that we suffer are opportunities for spiritual growth. Defeat is giving in to the temptations that come with those problems. Working to retain unity amongst God's people is commanded. And very often the things that cause disunity are not commanded by God. We need to understand the underlying cause. What Israel did was revert to past practice. They tried to improve things by adding a bit of holy furniture to their situation. Perhaps they were even trying to blackmail God. If we take the ark into battle, you wouldn't dare let us lose. But what does God want from them? To have the right religious furniture in place? Of course not. God wants the devotion of their hearts. He wants to see the great victories at the Jordan. He wants them to see the great victories at the Jordan and at Jericho, and to see them and see their own sinfulness, and to recognize their total dependence on God. Now, in 1 and 2 Samuel, David is not portrayed as perfect, not by any means. I mean, read that awful account in 2 Samuel of how David fell. But he is the man after God's own heart. He typifies the heart attitudes that God desired for all Israel. And we've seen an example of this, haven't we, in Psalm 40 at the beginning. Here, David considers God's greatness and recognizes God's saving power and confesses that he is sinful and helpless. Then he bows in submission and begs for God to save him. Let me read you that final verse again of Psalm 40. As for me, says David, that great man, I am poor and needy, but the Lord takes thought for me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, O my God.